It's a Jackalope Carnival! Jackalope Carnival!
Hi, I'm Becca.
Hi, I'm Eric.
And you're listening to Jackalope Carnival, a sideshow of stories, a bi-weekly podcast where we explore the paranormal, the unusual, and the downright odd. Speaking of odd...
Are you thinking about our sponsor? Because we picked up a sponsor, you know.
I do know that, and it's real odd.
Really? Here, let's just everyone listen. I think that we might be able to get a long-term relationship with these folks. It could be fruitful.
My name is William Biederman, and I approve this message. Got malaria troubles, gout troubles, preternatural troubles, ear troubles, girl troubles, female problems, car troubles, man problems, mail delivery issues, an issue from your facial orifice, or is your humerus just out of balance? Try Biederman Leeches. Mighty fine blood-sucking invertebrates fresh from the crystal clear waters of Mingo County, West Virginia. Biederman Leeches can't be beat.
Biederman Farms got medical leeches, but don't you come and see. Biederman Boys got mighty fine leeches for all your leechy needs. All their toilet paper is to ply, more fun than a stick in the eye. Boy, howdy how, they'll suck you dry. You can't beat a Biederman leech. No, you can't beat a Biederman leech.
Visit beatwilly.com, BEATWILLY.com.
There, what do you think?
Oh, that is some weird, creepy cures.
So, are we gonna sign a contract with them?
I think we have to. We don't really have any other sponsorship at this point. Beggars can't be choosers.
Fair point.
Well, today's show is about creepy cures and bad medicine. And if your first thought, like I know Eric's was, when I said the words bad medicine is that song by John Bon Jovi, you're my kind of folk. But bad medicine and creepy cures throughout history, they encompass quite a lot. So we decided to narrow it down and focus in on something that has been done by many cultures throughout history and is still in practice today. The use of medical leeches.
What are the chances that we would pick up that sponsor this week?
I mean, it's pretty incredible because they didn't even know we were doing medical leeches.
No idea.
Leeches, they're pretty gross, though. They're slimy, gelatinous, undulating vampires. And I think they should probably stay at the bottom of the pond. You know what? There's something that I actually have a familial connection with, believe it or not.
I can't wait to hear where this goes.
No, this is something like since I was a kid, when my grandmother was still alive, she would tell me stories that when she was a little girl in Italy, her grandmother, so my great-great-grandmother, would take her to nearby villages around L'Aquila in Italy, and they would use the leeches on sick people. So that always really fascinated me and also repulsed me. So you're like 5 years old, Grandma, what's leeches? You know, this was over 100 years ago, so let's not imagine this is a common practice there now. No pun intended, the practice of leeches held on for a little longer than you would have guessed. And so we're going to be talking about leeches as a unifying principle, but we also found some pretty interesting tidbits along the way.
Millions of leeches. Leeches for me. Okay.
That, I'll be fair. That was in my head the whole time.
How far back did you go in your research this week?
Real far back, way back. I took the way back machine. Because bloodletting is in itself something that's been done, like I said, for thousands of years. It's believed to have started in ancient Egypt. We really don't know. But what we've found, we as humans, is that there's a papyrus called the Ebers Papyrus. It was where we have written record of bloodletting. It's the first written record. And that's from about the 16th century BCE.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's way before Galen, because I was going to blame Galen for all this.
No, way before.
Yeah, like thousands of years before Galen.
Yeah. And it was also known to be practiced in China, Arabia, India, Europe, for different reasons in Mesoamerica, but the bloodletting has been done. Now, this papyrus that I'm talking about, the Ebers Papyrus, was taken from a tomb in Egypt in the 19th century. because that was kind of all the rage, wasn't it? Taking things from tombs in the 19th century. That's like, I feel like that's what they did as Victorians. They had seances and pillaged tombs. But anyway,
especially from Egypt. That was all, especially Egypt. That was definitely how you made your mark in society.
I mean, to be fair, there were some creepy cures having to do with use of actual mummy parts. But that's for another day, I'm afraid, another podcast. This particular papyrus was thought to have been written in the 16th century, but have been copied from many earlier works. So it's kind of like a best of greatest hits of cures. And so we don't really know how long bloodletting has been something that humans have done as a cure. These scrolls are really fascinating. This, along with one that was found right next to it called the Smith Papyrus.
That's a really odd name for an Egyptian person.
Yeah. Well, they were by the people who translated them. And sadly, the Ebers Papyrus, which is right now, you can see it. It's on display in Germany at the University of Leipzig. They bound it into a book. They cut the papyrus.
Ooh, they made a codex.
Yeah, and in the 19th century, they would have thought, oh, it's much better, safer in a book. So this is things that people in the 1800s had a few different ideas of than we do now. But they are bound into a book now. And they give us this unique information and insight into medicine and life in ancient Egypt. And it's fascinating, but I have to say some of it is creepy.
I mean, to be fair, right? I mean, a lot of medicine involves, the yucky stuff, right? I mean, literal blood and guts is what we're talking about here.
Cat poop. We're talking about cat poop.
Oh, well, that one touche.
So much, I actually read large chunks of this. You can get it online. It's available in English translation. It's called the Ebers Papyrus, and you can get it free online. And I spent way too much time reading this. And because of the aforementioned, I think maybe 101 miscellaneous uses for dung might be a good title, or healing with mice. I'm not quite sure, but there were some things in there that was just really interesting. And I highly recommend giving it a little go because, yeah, there's, like I said, cat poop.
It really makes the whole scarab thing make a lot more sense now.
Healing with cat poop. So the Ebers Papyrus, it does have some ideas about theory. So this isn't just a medical papyrus. This is medicine and religion. So there are chants that you say. There are things that you do, but there are also chants that you say. What's really interesting about it is, as much as I'm making fun of them for using dung or mice, some of these just things that basically would probably go into the landfill anywhere else, or at least into the, compost pile. They would use them as cures, and really check it out. You see it. I am not exaggerating. But we do realize that they have a pretty good idea about our circulatory system. They understand the heart, although they see it as being a well where blood collects rather than being a pump. But they have extensive knowledge of veins and arteries, etc. Maybe not using those same words. Mm-hmm. However, one of their theories is that the heart is too full of blood and at times air. In certain parts of the body, you can get too much air or too much blood. So they're talking about imbalances. However, it's not until the Greeks that refine this type of thinking about balances and imbalances in the body that it becomes a dominant thought in Western medicine. So I am aware that China has a whole nother idea of balance. In Asia and India, there are all these ideas going on. We're going toward the West in this one. This thought in Western medicine starts around the 5th century BCE with the theory of the four humors. And this theory of the four humors, or this theory of four elements, is where it starts, and then we get the four humors from this, is an important development in medical knowledge. And it starts with some of the thoughts of Aristotle. But Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath, famous Greek doctor, essentially, he's credited with developing this theory. And the Greeks believed that the four elements that made up all matter on Earth were also linked to human character. Bodily fluids, seasons, So like heat, cold, etc. And this was the four humors. I have an undergraduate degree in art history along with other things. And one of them, when we did so many paintings with the four humors, that was something that I always found pretty fascinating.
So wasn't it phlegm, blood, black bile, and what was the fourth one?
That would be yellow bile.
Yellow bile. Okay. How do you get that
That's good though. How do you get out the yellow bile?
I mean, you get out the blood by like obviously, aforementioned leeches. But like if you're overly like yellow, if you're bilous in a yellow way, what do you do with it?
I don't know, but I can tell you about some art history depictions of it. So yeah. And how do you get out phlegm? The phlegm was a calm person. It was winter and cold and moist. I know a lot of people hate that word. I apologize for using it. And water. Blood is happiness, cheeriness, spring, hot.
Right.
And again,
the word sanguine comes from this.
I'm going to use the M word, moist. Choleric was yellow bile. It was active. And, these humors that I'm going through, they are in balance and they're mingled. You're good. You're in health. But if they're out of proportion, you can come sick. To live a healthy life, healthy humors. You got to have that balance of your humors. So the thing is if you have a fever, that makes you hot, and hot relates to too much blood, sanguinous. Mm-hmm. And so if you have too much blood, you just got to let it all out. And so you needed a bloodletting, and that's how that would have been treated. So this theory lasted much longer, and that was what I remember from art history classes. Lasted much longer than one would imagine.
Yeah, like, right. Yes. Like, well into the United States' history is what I was reading about. Or your grandmother's talking about it, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. So, I mean, and my grandmother was born in 1906, to be fair, but
right.
Yeah, it lasted quite a bit longer. And some of it still persisted up until, so they were saying like it's about the 1800s when this practice stops being kind of the norm, but it still does persist in some areas and some doctors. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, to let out that bad blood. And that's where we actually get the term bad blood. There's bad blood between them. So you can do cupping, which I knew about cupping, but I didn't know that cupping was actually done. You can scrape the area, and it's thought to get out like surface blood from the skin, not from your veins. But cupping is
I've done cupping before, actually.
Yeah, but not the kind where they take your blood.
No. Not the bleedy kind. Just I'm sitting in a nice room and someone's playing like the plinky music, and yeah,
I've had friends who have tried it and they've told me it's really relaxing.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
It's one of its uses is to actually extract blood.
Right.
Lancing, scarring, slicing, but one of the most efficient ways, and I think kind of elegant in its design, comes from nature. And that is, of course, Eric, you want to sing it? Leeches.
The leech song. Millions of leeches for free. Millions of leeches. Sorry.
Leeches are not free. We'll find that out later.
No, Biederman Farms has made quite a tidy sum selling the old leeches.
Yeah, and to be fair, if y'all are interested, YouTube, which I watched too many YouTube leech videos. There was one that I kind of skipped over, but it was basically how to farm leeches for fun and profit. So hate to dig into Biederman's profits. Man, Eric, now they're never going to sponsor us.
I know. We're going to lose that sponsorship.
I'm so sorry. So leeches that are used in bloodletting, they're called medicinal leeches, and they're a specific variety of leech, Hirudo medicinalis. And they use a combo of mucus and suction to stay on their host. And they can suck out about 5 to 10 milliliters of blood at one feeding.
And if they added a little bile into that, they could get all the humors involved.
Yeah, like where are the bile leeches? That's what I want to know.
And there is your band title for the week, the Bile Leeches.
The Bile Leeches.
For whoever is keeping track of our band names, there you go.
Yeah, nice. Phlegm. It's better than the phlegm leeches. I mean, that's like the hardcore. That's their hardcore outlet.
I don't even want to hear that again. I never want to hear that combination of words again.
Moist phlegm leeches.
Then once again, our listenership is just halved. Like,
All right. Well, Eric will edit that out, I promise. So
will I?
maybe not. So like I said, this lasts a long time. There's different ways of doing it. And leeches can grow in blood to almost 10 times their own weight. So Eric, tell us a little about, I mentioned leeches in ancient Greece, in Egypt. Tell me a little bit about leeches in the Americas.
Okay, let me do that. And let me tell you, let me first give my props here. So most of what I have here, I did know a little bit about colonial era and early Republic medicine. No, not leeches specific. I mean, yes, a little bit about leeches too, but I knew a little bit about early Republic and colonial era medicine, but I stumbled across while I was doing my research a paper written by, he's actually a medical historian. His name is Richard Harrison Shiryak, and if I'm mispronouncing that, it's likely. And that's Shryok. And he has this great paper that I ran across that was simply titled 18th Century Medicine in America. And that's where I got most of my information from, in addition to the things that I kind of already knew. But it really tells a very interesting story about how really ancient, honestly, medical practices were in not really the early Republic. That's when things started changing, but how ancient medicine still survived well into the colonial era. And that people were still talking about humors, which is an idea that goes back for millennia. And what I kind of was struck by, and what I think that this paper really kind of highlighted, is how medicine really changed when Louis Pasteur showed that there's a living world that's smaller, right? That's smaller than what the human eye can detect. And that was just a revolutionary. It was a game changer. And before that, people didn't actually have a very good sense of what disease was. Now we think of disease as being like an infection by a specific pathogen or by a specific virus or bacteria. Back then, they didn't think that way. And that kind of explains, and I never put this all together before, but this makes perfect sense now. When you look at old death certificates, like modern death certificates, okay, just so you don't think I'm a total weirdo, why do I know so much about modern death certificates? One of my jobs, I've actually had a ridiculous amount of jobs in my life. One of my jobs in my 20s was working for a bank. And my job was directing mail in this bank on the West Coast in Seattle. And in order for people to get the names of departed, deceased loved ones off of bank accounts, they would have to send the bank copies of death certificates. And that landed in my department. And so my job was to get death certificates out of their envelopes and direct them to the right place. And so for that year, I ran across literally thousands of death certificates. And it's a little morbid, but I started reading them. And cause of death is usually pretty specific, but it's pretty, in line with medical science, So we have people who die of like heart failure, which is a common one, or cancer. But you also have like, specific diseases. And we think of those as being actual illnesses, but that wasn't the case. Back then, they didn't really describe illness as a specific disease, but rather by its symptom. And so you find in old death certificates, people saying things like, he died of chest swelling or heart swelling, and which isn't a disease, right? Or like congestion of the lungs. Actually, when I was doing research for possibly a show we'll do in the future, in Edgar Allan Poe's death certificate, his cause of death is listed as brain congestion, which that's not a thing, right? There's no such thing as brain congestion. So they're flying blind here, right? They don't really know what causes disease. They only know what people complain about. They don't have a sense of germs or viruses or bacteria or things like that. Kind of the human body is this black box, right? You see kind of symptoms, you see physical manifestation, but you don't know what's causing it. And so you're guessing at it. And so you're guessing at things like humors, or you're guessing at things like bad air, right? Malaria, it literally means bad air. And, we had this idea that impure air, impure food, impure water will make you sick. And fair enough, right? That's true. But they didn't know why exactly. And hence we get cures like, stick a leech on them. That'll get some of that bad blood out.
Well, and to be fair, some of those theories lasted longer than we would think.
Right. I mean, actually, this type of medicine isn't completely without merit. I mean, without knowing exactly why, they stumbled across things that worked. Right.
Well, hygiene. I know in the Civil War specifically, like they didn't know, about this exactly what was going on, but they knew to stay away from the latrines. They didn't know exactly why they were getting diseases, but they kind of knew to stay away from certain things.
And to be fair, like our bodies have developed to around this, right? The reason why things smell bad to us is because our body is telling us, don't eat that. The reason why we
unless you're doing ancient Egyptian medicine, I just want to point out.
Right, fair. Right, but for the most part, right? I mean, there's a reason why universally things, like human bodily waste smells bad to humans because we have developed so that we avoid that, right? Because that's bad for us. But also things like plant medicines, which humans have used since literally before recorded time. Some of them work. And, a lot of them work. And people didn't know why. They just knew that if you took this particular plant when you had, if you took willow bark when you had a headache, it made it go away. They knew that if there were certain plants you could have for an upset stomach. If you had mint tea, it would calm an upset stomach often. And that was just sort of like regular trial and error. And this sort of medicine is what we think of as medicine, quite honestly, for most of the colonial era. And what we think of today as medicine as the highly scientific profession that it is now, that requires, a large amount of schooling and an intense amount of training, and rightfully so, right? I mean, doctors are learning an immense amount of knowledge that we add to every year, and doctors have to keep up to date with the current knowledge because it's moving so quickly. That's not really what was happening for most of the colonial era from like the 17th and 18th century. And instead what you had is you basically had people who became doctors because they apprenticed under another doctor. And what Dr. A might know and might have learned is going to be completely different from what doctor in another town might know because they're learning things that are learned by trial and error. Two other groups of people also became doctors that we wouldn't think of as doctors today. Now, barbers, I know people know about like barbers being in the medical profession as such. But women often became the doctors of their home, right? And they were the ones who people turned to when, the children got a cough and they knew what plants.
That was my great-great-grandmother in the Leeches. She was the doctor of her area.
Mm-hmm. Or, you had midwives doing basically the same thing, right? Taking care of women's health when it came to reproduction. But the other people that I found, this is very interesting. I totally didn't see this one coming. But again, according to this paper by Richard Shiriak, that people turned to clergy during the colonial era. I say this as a person who counts a lot of clergy as friends. Holy cow, that's a terrible. No, I'm just kidding. But they would eventually learn because they had to, and they would pick up things also. But we don't normally think of your local, pastor or preacher as a person who does medicine, but they did. They would come to do medicine, hopefully before you were on your deathbed. But if everything's turned south, just one-stop shopping at least. So you got that. This is going to all change. This is going to change. Actually, the profession of medicine will become more professionalized late in the colonial era. So we get the first formal medical training happening in Philadelphia in the 1760s. We have the colony's first medical school in Philadelphia. King's College, which will become Columbia University in New York, will open soon afterwards. And this is providing professional medical training, but still, they don't have germ theory yet. And so even though it's becoming something a little more professionalized, and they can read the Latin books and they can read Galen and things like that, it's still not what we think of as modern medicine. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Turns out that these folks with their fancy medical degrees in the 1760s, at least, did not actually ensure that you'd be getting the best medical care possible, because a lot of the medicine they were learning was theoretical in nature and not very practical. to the point where in the 1700s, if you ended up getting shot, and that tended to happen because people liked to duel back then, if you were poor and the bullet didn't hit anything that would kill you fairly quickly, your chances of surviving that gunshot were better if you were poor than if you were wealthy. And the reason for that is wealthy people could hire doctors to dig the bullet out. And these are doctors who had no clue about germ theory. And so washing your hands or washing instruments wasn't going to happen. And so it turns out that wealthy people who were getting treated for bullet wounds were dying of infection later. Whereas poor people just sort of, I think the joke about Andrew Jackson, who, while he wasn't poor, he grew up a little more humble. The joke was that he had so many bullets in them that when he walked around, he clinked from all the lead hitting each other. But, he survived all of his gunshot wounds and lived long enough to, wish that he could have killed his vice president. Literal last words. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So medicine is still, it's becoming a profession, but it's still not what we think of as modern medicine. And that's not really going to change much. And honestly, women as the local healers of the town or the household are still going to be doing a lot of the work. And in African American communities, both enslaved and free, African Americans will have their own system of medicine, some of which will have some overlap with other folks in rural areas using plant medicines. But also there's medical practices that have overlap with spiritual practices that survived from Africa as well. And you had people that were recognized as people who knew medicine or informal doctors in the African American community as well. And this is all happening in the 17 and 1800s. We really see the development of modern medicine, though, around the Civil War era. And the reason for that is Louis Pasteur's, basically his discoveries are revolutionary, right? Once it's discovered that there's a whole world of living things that are smaller than the human eye, and we get an idea about bacteria and then eventually viruses, everything that we know about medicine changes from what we knew thousands of years before that. And from that point forward, medicine kind of starts developing in a way that would look a little more familiar to us. Now, I do want to say one more thing before I kind of wrap up my portion here, and that is there are times, though, when what is old is new again. And even though medicine took a giant step forward when it comes to germ theory and finding out the cause of disease, some of the older ideas about kind of more holistic health, and by holistic here, I don't mean like, a catch-all phrase that means, I feel like holistic has become to mean yoga, but but what I mean is wellness of the whole person, exercise, fresh air, things like that. There is space for that too, right? And even herbalism. I believe
we will talk about some of that in a later episode, actually, not to give hints away.
Right. It's a little teaser there for you. But, things even like herbal medicine, those things that you would think of maybe as kind of out of date or old fashioned, some of those still stick around. They stick around because some people find relief in them.
Well, and sometimes some of these things stick around because we have germ theory. And it's like, okay, well, germ theory happened at this date, so they would have known. That doesn't mean people would have adopted it quickly. And we kind of know that not necessarily, while there are theories, while there are ways of doing stuff, sometimes the older physicians, sometimes more rural communities wouldn't have adopted them quite as quickly as maybe places in the city. So while we do have these, we don't always see it in practice a year after it's discovered, etc.
That's basically what I got. That's all I got. So what do you have, Becca?
Well, one of the things I was thinking about, and I'm going to go back, but I was reading the book, I think it's just called The Great Pandemic. And I believe it's John Barry. And if I've gotten your name wrong, I apologize, John Barry. But he was saying that even in, 1918, there were people that were doing bloodletting. There were doctors that were doing bloodletting in 1918 with the pandemic.
Where?
Well, in America. And part of the reason of this was because, as we know, in 1918, that pandemic targeted younger people.
Right.
And so what you had was older doctors coming out of retirement, older doctors coming out of retirement that were like, well, this is what I did when I first started. This is what I did my whole practice, and I'm going to do it now.
I'm imagining somebody being like, come on, boys, they need us. And like picking up a jar of leeches from his windowsill.
But
I knew
quite
this
literally.
day would come.
Yeah, but there are accounts of this happening. So it's just interesting. It's like, well, yes, however, and I think that we can say today with new medical technology, and we see this literally, in the year 2021, where there's new medical technology, but people are questioning it. There's a new way of vaccination, and people are kind of questioning it and aren't really ready to quite jump on that. So they were no different than this, basically.
I ran into something very interesting when I was
with the leeches.
Before we get to leeches, can I share this one thing though that I found interesting and actually in this paper again? Did you know that George Washington inoculated the Continental Army against smallpox?
Yes, I did actually. Yeah, I did. Sorry. I mean, no.
It doesn't matter. Either way, it's really cool. And it actually, kept the Continental Army from catching smallpox, which was a super deadly disease.
Did you know George Washington used leeches had leeches used on him a few times?
My understanding is that some suspect that may have contributed to his death, that he excessive bloodletting.
I'm not saying bloodletting is great. I'm saying that actually in that time, and I'll go to that excessive bloodletting was something that was kind of enthusiastically being practiced. And we start to see it in the 19th century with a certain doctor, and his name's Dr. Francois Broussais. And he's a French doctor from Paris and really credited with the use of bloodletting and the use of leeches in the 19th century, especially in France.
Can we call him the father of leeches? Because that's kind of awesome.
That's kind of an awesome band name too. Father of Leeches. Maybe that's their first hit.
Father of Leeches.
I believe that's the first hit for, what was it? Moist Phlegm Leeches. All right. So Dr. Broussais, I cannot pronounce that, forgive me. He, like many others, he believed, so inflammation at this time was something that was being talked about. That inflammation in the body was because there was an excess of blood at the site. That's why inflammation happened. And he wholeheartedly believed this theory. And while he was known for the aggressive use of bloodletting, so lancing, etc., he also used leechcraft, especially in areas of the body where an incision would be difficult to control. Oh, so you can turn the volume down. Nose, ears, or nether regions. So you would place the leech where maybe you couldn't do any other kind of bloodletting. So up your nose, check. In your ear, check. And nether regions. So
leechcraft is no joke.
Leechcraft is no joke. So they would be placed directly on the area of body that was inflamed. But he was accused of being a little too enthusiastic in his bloodletting.
Oh my gosh.
Like they would do bloodletting and purging. So you would bleed them and also purge them, meaning they would take diuretics, they would take things that would make them throw up.
Like Epicac.
So there were quite a few other things going on, and that possibly was what happened to George. But leeches were used a little excessively as well, because at that point it was like, hay fever, how about some leeches? Arthritis, I got leeches for that. You got leech fever, I got more leeches. There's not really such a thing as leech fever that I know of. All right.
I got a fever, and the only thing that'll cure it is more leeches.
So in the 19th century, there's so popular that there's actually a leech shortage in Western Europe. And I was reading the article. So my article that I enjoyed for this was the Cambridge Journal of Medical History has an article by Tunis Willem van Henning. And he gives us an account of a French anatomist named Jean-Baptiste Sarlandier, who attempted to solve the issue by inventing a mechanical leech. So Sarlandier said his mechanical leeches...
We have veered completely into mad science at this point. Like, we were flirting with it for a long time.
Eric, they still have... We'll go into this. This is not. So he says his mechanical leeches or his blood pump is better because it's more practical than live leeches. And those live leeches were mysteriously dying and becoming more expensive. He estimated that the French government was spending 1.5 million francs per year, which I was trying to find the equivalent of this in dollars today, and it was roughly 1.8 billion. I don't know if that's correct, but you get the idea.
That's a lot of leeches.
France was spending a lot of money on leeches, and he's like, hey, this is too many leeches. So the article that I was reading in this Cambridge Journal of Medicine is brilliant because it comes with a chart. And that chart shows exactly how many leeches were being imported into France from 1827 to 1836. And spoiler, it's millions of leeches. Hundreds.
I was reading a little bit about leeches when I was doing research, and turns out, by the way, did you know that there are 4 different species that were once all called the same species of medical leech that to the naked eye look pretty much exactly the same, but like their genomes are different. And some of those species of leeches, like you were saying, ended up really becoming difficult to find in the wild because of overharvesting.
Yeah, and it's funny that you're actually saying that. One of his arguments were like, look, this is not only convenient and money saving, but here's the thing. Leeches, there are different. So you can't tell how much blood a leech is going to take. You can't see how much they're taking. They're different sizes. They have different appetites. You don't want one of those dieting leeches.
You want Biederman leeches, quality leeches for the 21st century.
Good job. Good job in working that in. Maybe they'll keep us now.
Hopefully.
But with this device, you can see the blood filtering in the glass domes. And these domes look like cupping cups. If you don't know what that looks like, little jam pots, or for my Southern Americans, such as myself, jelly jars. So anyhow.
I was hoping that the artificial, was kind of hoping that the artificial leech be like a Frankenstein leech. Like it had like little like electrodes sticking out of its like little leech
It is
neck.
kind of a sentence from horror. And he created artificial mechanical leeches.
And then, I want to hear like a mwahahaha after that,
But medical leeches did start to wane a bit in Europe as other therapies and ideas are introduced. And some doctors were actually really squeamish about using them and never used them at all. And, we talked about that. And here's the interesting thing is that while they went out of favor in 2004, the FDA, so the Food and Drug Administration of the United States, approved leeches for use medicinally in America. So leeches are used in modern medicine. Same thing, though. A lot of doctors don't want to use them. But from what I understand, they use them in plastic surgery because when skin and tissue is put onto a site, our bodies are really good about being able to pump blood in, but we're not so good about that tissue pumping blood back out. And so they said it's like leeches were made for this purpose. So leeches can drain those conveniently very well in a way that makes them particularly necessary, but particularly handy just for that.
And having a natural anticoagulant in their saliva helps
exactly, a lot. Exactly. So yeah, there's the story of leeches.
Well,
if you're still listening,
glad you're here.
But thank you for joining us this week. We hope you aren't too taken aback by our leech talk and come and listen to us next week.
And please, if you do have any leech needs, visit Biederman Farms for all of your medical leeches.
Jackalope Carnival!
Like your death certificate, things appropriate for children.
Anyway,